UFO disclosure, the future of humanity hangs in the balance. That's the title of my new article, which I will recite in this video. I will include an additional 800 words in this video that didn't make it into my article, which is linked below. Let's begin, muchacho. UFO disclosure, the future of humanity hangs in the balance. The UFO enigma demands a global response. Our scientific and generational future is at stake. This is why it's so damn weird that the idea of UFO disclosure has an asinine stigma, when, ironically, it's what the UFO or UAP field most desperately needs. People who act antagonistically toward the idea of disclosure often see the status quo as advantageous to their influence in this field. For example, some skeptics don't want disclosure, possibly because they adore the idea that they're above UFO believers and are busy saving them from their poor analytical skills. Yet some UFO believers, despite recognizing the significance of the mystery, are reluctant to support widespread disclosure. Their perspective mirrors that of music aficionados who discover an underground band. They treasure the exclusivity, fearing that mainstream attention might dilute its personal significance for them. Moreover, people highly invested in their particular UFO narrative also sometimes oppose disclosure. Some have in effect made cottage industries from their teachings, which rely on dogma. Moving forward, let's explore some UFO dogmas from the anti-disclosure crowd. And of course, there can be crossover amongst the various factions. Some UFO dogmas from the anti-disclosure crowd. For instance, UFO spiritualists staunchly believe we're not dealing with physical craft and certainly not extraterrestrial beings. This crowd dismisses specific claims asserted by UFO whistleblower David Grusch, including the claim that ships have been recovered. They are allergic to anything emerging that challenges their gospel of the UFO enigma. On the other hand, UFO conspiracists are adamant that people like Lou Elizondo are part of a psyop to lead the public astray on the UFO mystery. The last thing they want is history to pen a narrative contrary to theirs, that he was a force for good. So while they may desire disclosure, that's only if it aligns with the narrative they've spread. Similarly, alien ambassadors, or the all aliens are good crowd, often consider disclosure a threat. They feel that the disclosure process we're currently seeing is manipulative. If we were to have honest disclosure, they tell us, it would look much different, and the people they respect would play much more prominent roles. Another perspective comes from what I call UFO gatekeepers. They will tell you they want the entire subject reformed, but this is only if they are at the center of this effort. They want to keep the talent pool small so that they remain the big fish within the most miniature pond possible. In other words, relevancy is worth more to them than disclosure, and they believe their way is the best. Ultimately, this comes down to a sentiment that journalist George Knapp has repeated over the years. Not everyone wants the truth, they simply want their truth. While some people feel threatened by disclosure, it's also true that most everyday UFO people want maximum UFO transparency. So in that light, most of us are fighting for a righteous and progressive cause that we believe will benefit mankind. UFO studies will remain hindered without disclosure. What does the effective worldwide study of UAP look like? That depends on what they are. If there's an extremely high probability that UAP are not alien technology exceeding the next generation, then it's very debatable how much money should be spent studying this enigma. And frankly, this is what the US government has wanted us to accept since Roswell, which is why the Pentagon, contrary to what many assert, has persistently downplayed UAP as a national security threat. If the national security establishment wanted to portray UAP as a colossal threat, they wouldn't be so reluctant to be clear on their capabilities. Once those capabilities are definitively explained, there will be no more wiggle room on where this technology stems. In a bizarre sense, it's as if they are covering for the aliens, which makes you wonder if the US government did make a secret deal with them. David Grusch has stated he wants more details on precisely this potentiality. If the US government portrayed UFOs based on their knowledge of them, the world would be eager to understand this enigma, partly because the stakes are so high. They don't want us involved. And that's a problem. UAP, a serious threat regardless of non-human occupants. The national security threat UAP represent isn't confined to the intelligences behind these craft. If UFOs are indeed alien technology, there's likely a silent race among nations to replicate it. This achievement would grant a country an asymmetric military advantage over its adversaries. This development would likely be more concerning than the implications of an unknown alien presence on our planet. Any nation unilaterally acquiring full UFO capabilities would presumably possess a metaphorical blank check for foreign policy, seemingly allowing any policy choice without significant accountability. To grasp the magnitude of this, imagine 10,000 Tic-Tac UFOs under a single nation's control. Their capabilities presumably include remaining airborne indefinitely, instantaneous acceleration, stopping on a dime and low observability, staying submerged in oceans for extended periods without refueling, while covertly tracking every submarine and naval vessel of adversaries, perpetually monitoring every ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile silo worldwide, and having the capacity to detonate a launched missile before it reaches 50 feet in the air. But could there be a silver lining to this seemingly bleak scenario? Acknowledgement of alien technology could promote peace. Reported, well-documented encounters with excellent expert witnesses, like the USS Nimitz UFO event series in 2004, suggest capabilities far beyond our current understanding. Society must confront these revelations head-on. It's vital to have a global dialogue on the implications and management of such profound technological leaps that are likely inevitable. Ignoring them could jeopardize the well-being of countless future generations. If alien technology is militarized and put in the wrong hands, any future conflict would likely involve devastation on a scale not seen before, since it would be so devastatingly effective. Perhaps by collectively recognizing the incomprehensible power of these technologies, we'll realize the ultimate futility of war. Otherwise, we have no future. If UFOs employ a form of gravity propulsion, its mastery of space-time should herald an era of cooperation, not confrontation. Harnessing such power for the collective good, ensuring global prosperity and well-being should be our shared goal. Without a global conversation on this technology, we could one day collectively wake up learning that a nation has unilaterally replicated these non-human advancements. We undeniably need extensive global dialogue before we reach that point. Leaving this responsibility exclusively and covertly in the hands of a small group of government officials is the definition of madness. as this will profoundly impact all of humanity. UFOs, the DoD, and the intel community, a preference for secrecy over transparency. The evidence is overwhelming that the Department of Defense's biggest UAP priority from a societal impact perspective is to have us all ignore them. This is precisely why, when the Air Force closed Project Blue Book, they constructed a fact sheet in which one of its statements said, quote, "No UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force has ever given any indication of a threat to our national security," end quote. This intentionally fabricated statement screamed, "Nothing to see here." According to Leslie Kane, the Air Force has repeatedly used this fact sheet when approached with questions about UFOs. But even today, the Air Force and DoD continue to be highly motivated to downplay UAP as a threat to the point of absurdity. A recent illustration of this can be traced to the first UFO hearing in over 50 years that took place in May of 2022. In that hearing, Representative Gallagher of Wisconsin asked Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence Scott Bray and Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security Ronald Moultrie if they knew of the famous Malmstrom Air Force Base incident where reportedly 10 nuclear ICBMs were taken offline by UAP. Astonishingly, they both claimed they had not seen any official assessment of this incident and offered no analysis of it whatsoever. Discussing this incident would have been an ideal opportunity to scare people if the DoD were intent on generating a chilling threat narrative. They could have covered the Malmstrom incident extensively and then broached other UFO and nuke historical events, such as those where reportedly UAP turned on nuclear ICBMs in the United States and Russia, casting these incidents in a menacing light to evoke widespread concern about UFOs. From every angle, having your weapons of mass destruction surveilled and sometimes tampered with is unambiguously a potential national security threat. Still, we heard bupkis from DoD representatives on that because the DoD wants us to ignore the UFO issue. I could relay a myriad of examples unambiguously demonstrating that the national security establishment has no intention of promoting an overwhelming UFO threat narrative. But we'll leave it there. My analysis seems self-evident 6 years after the famous New York Times article dropped. Nevertheless, I find it deeply concerning that the DoD doesn't want to publicly discuss the UFO and nuke connection. Our civilization urgently needs to engage in a conversation about this critical aspect of the UFO presence. Participating in this dialogue would initiate a better understanding of this enigma's nature and agenda. We can have this adult conversation without resorting to unnecessary scare tactics. Without disclosure, the UFO topic will stagnate to the detriment of all 8 billion of us. The takeaway is that UFO disclosure is a game changer, and it's clear that much of the intelligence community opposes it. This is why the idea that the US government would create a massive UFO threat narrative is a misguided assessment. Such a tactic would ultimately lead to a deeper understanding of the topic. For example, if the US government portrayed the phenomenon as an existential threat, it would have spurred global institutions into a well-funded and relentless effort to swiftly solve this enigma for humanity's salvation. This is precisely the opposite of what the national security establishment wanted. So 70 plus years later, our institutions still know nothing about this enigma and even reject its reality. Today, we would be closer to the truth if they had created a substantial threat narrative, prompting science to objectively investigate this enduring enigma. Believe it or not, the UFO cover-up is far more sinister than a fabricated threat narrative. It inhibited us from asking essential questions about our place in the universe, which I believe would have advanced civilization, influencing us to de-emphasize many of our sometimes petty differences and squabbles so that we could pay more attention to other matters that impact us all. The questions we would ask about our world and universe as a consequence of disclosure would help redirect our attention to what's most pressing: corruption in our corporations, economies, governments, and environmental degradation. Why? One reason is that an unavoidable question would dominate our thoughts. Why did certain governments conceal and deceive the global populace about evidence of non-human intelligence? Grasping the depth of deceit required for such a prolonged cover-up would undoubtedly shake our collective trust. This revelation might serve as a galactic wake-up call, highlighting the dangers of ignoring problems that have global repercussions. The disclosure could foster a universal disdain for deceit and misconduct. After all, this isn't a deception targeting a single region, demographic, or ethnicity. It affects all 8 billion of us. What emerges from such a revelation remains uncertain. Still, one can hope it leads to a more united stance against the long-standing issues that have plagued humanity. That's where the Medium article ends. Here are 800 more words that didn't make it into the article because I realized, with the help of my editor, that it made sense for this to be the conclusion of the article. But since this is the video, we can add it. So let's go a little further, shall we? Let's explore some of the inevitable questions we'd have after disclosure that would help unify our species. Post-disclosure era, an avalanche of inquiries. After disclosure, thousands of questions that would have been considered irrational in a pre-disclosure world will suddenly be deemed rational and essential for society to discuss. Here are a few that immediately come to mind that we'll not only discuss around the dinner table, but every Earth institution will have a moral obligation to grapple with. Did UFOs influence the development of world religions and human culture in general? Are people of all genders and ages, including children, getting abducted by aliens? If so, why? And how often? Are large populations of aliens or their drones residing in our oceans? If so, what the hell are they doing there? Why have aliens engaged our world in an overwhelmingly covert way, leaving us to interpret their agenda subjectively? Are aliens walking among us? Will there ever be open contact? What should we do to prepare the world for this potential inevitability? Open contact, disclosure amplified. While UFO disclosure is a colossal leap forward that undeniably reshapes our world, open contact transcends even these seismic changes, ushering in an era of transformation that dwarfs anything we've ever experienced in our civilization's history. If we're headed toward a post-disclosure world, it's likely inevitable that open contact follows. In the June 5th debrief article that broke the David Grusch story, Grusch stated, "It was dangerous for this 80-year arms race to continue in secrecy because it further inhibits the world populace to be prepared for an unexpected non-human intelligence contact scenario," end quote. I believe Grusch didn't just come forward because humanity has a right to know their place in the universe, but also because governments are playing with fire. By not adequately preparing us for the various scenarios that could develop when non-human intelligences are engaging our world. You can't predict what non-human intelligence will do next. From an alleged school landing in Rua, Zimbabwe in 1994 to a UFO crash in Varginha, Brazil in 1996, we can't predict what the intelligences behind UFOs will do next. Maintaining secrecy from all 8 billion of us will only work for as long as the phenomenon behaves as expected. Why would anyone expect anything from non-human intelligences when we don't even understand them? Any government covering up this reality selfishly plays roulette with the relationship between governments and the governed. It's one thing for governments to come clean on a potential 90-year cover-up to make things right. However, it's an entirely different animal to admit to this bombshell because the phenomenon behaved unexpectedly and left them with no choice. The latter would have a devastating impact on civilization that the world would never heal from. It's bizarre that governments gamble with this potential. This is yet another reason we need disclosure now. Beyond this, we're all in the dark about what would be the most extraordinary world history. Hidden interactions, the untold history of humanity and UFOs. James Fox, in his documentary Moment of Contact, posed a thought-provoking question regarding the 1996 Varginha UFO crash. Quote, let's just say, hypothetically, for a moment, if it did happen, how significant of an event would it be? I bet you that everyone would say there's nothing more significant than this story if it were true. If some UFOs are what they appear to be, then non-human intelligences interact with humanity daily. So bizarrely, the most significant world history is transpiring around us every day, has been doing so for many decades, and yet we don't collectively discuss it. It would only require a small percentage of claimed UFO interactions to be accurate for this statement to hold true. Currently, we have no smoking gun evidence of non-human intelligence in the public domain, but there is very compelling evidence that some governments do. We can only speculate why governments have been able to obtain smoking gun evidence rather than the vast public. But the reasons for this could range from governments having the best sensors to non-human intelligences showing particular interest in military technologies. Furthermore, it might be that these intelligences allow governments to be more privy to their presence while being discreet in their interactions with the general populace. It's easy to speculate and anthropomorphize why this presence behaves how it does. But if the world's populace never examines this enigma, we may never attain objective answers. I'm not sure there is a greater madness than governments covering up a non-human presence, consensus reality buying into this deception, and science largely ignoring our most profound mystery. We need disclosure now. So that wraps that up. The article is done. And this was the portion that didn't make it into the article. Now, my editor said maybe I should describe what disclosure entails. I decided not to do that, just to keep it flowing and as concise as possible. I think most people know what disclosure is, at least those that would be interested in this article perhaps. But I will say this as a matter of record. Obviously, disclosure does not have to come from any government. The phenomenon itself, which we kind of just went over a little bit, could force disclosure. Scientific efforts could be equivalent with disclosure. Disclosure is nothing more than smoking gun evidence of a UFO presence of non-human intelligence. That's it. And it's not good enough to have people on Twitter or whatever, or enthusiasts that write articles to say, we don't need the government, we don't need disclosure. I want to feel good and special. I want this to be something that's fringe and remains fringe because that makes me feel special. And it's like, nah, son, that's ridiculous. How much do you want your children or your children's children or your children's 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 to be in the dark of this phenomenon? Like, how are we actually going to make progress on this? We're obviously going to need disclosure. And the fact that some people are uncomfortable saying that word and perceive a stigma with that word is an absurdity. It's absolutely essential we get disclosure in one shape, form, or the other, or this is not going anywhere. Now, it goes without saying, I could be wrong about the UFO phenomenon. I'm actually famous for saying that. Obviously, I could be wrong, but this is an opinion piece. And in the balance of probability, I think there's a very strong probability that some UFOs stem from non-human intelligence, and that at the very minimum, multiple governments are keeping that knowledge from the public and have scientific forensic proof of that reality. So I think that's all I got to say. I'm sorry I haven't published in a while, but hopefully this does you some good, and I plan on publishing more before the month's over. So thank you so much for everyone that supports me in any way that you support me, including patrons and YouTube members and people that buy merch and one-time donations. I couldn't do without you. And of course, if you want to support me in any of those capacities, you can do so by looking at the description below. That really does motivate me and keeps this effort afloat. Please do not forget to subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Special thanks to all patrons, YouTube members, those that have bought merch, those that have given me one-time donation. I couldn't do without you. Thank you so much. See you in the next episode.